Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I take a look at the 2017 film The Great Wall. It stars Matt Damon, Pedro Pascal, and William Dafoe, along with a whole bunch of Chinese actors who I'm not going to do them the disservice of trying to pronounce their names. It is a fantastical monster movie slash dragon movie set in China around the Great Wall of China. It has a 36% on the tomato meter and a 42% on the audience score. There are 23,641 actual audience reviews. So not a whole lot, but enough certainly to get the gist of where this is going in the rotten direction. And I will agree that this is just slightly rotten. 42% on the audience score, that could be fair, but it would be fair also if that bumped up to, like, say, 55% on the audience score, because I don't think this film deserves to be truly rotten. I think it's still largely enjoyable. I think its greatest flaw is that it would appeal more in a logical sense to someone that's a lot younger than myself, such as a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and the logic wouldn't be a problem with them. But as an adult, I expect a little bit more logical explanation on background of how this scenario at the Great Wall happened to be, and this movie didn't deliver it, not in a way that an adult would find satisfying, and so it still deserves to be slightly rotten. Now let's get right into the audience reviews and see what other people think. We have the first review from December 23, 2019, making it 7 days ago. 3 stars, nice visuals, awful script. Yeah, I'll largely agree with the awful script. It could have been not only a lot more exciting, but a lot more logically set up so that I was more into the whole thing, so that my suspension of disbelief was a lot more than I think this could have been 3 stars, but I don't agree on 3 stars. I have to assign this 1.5, peaking out at 2 stars, because it's enjoyable enough, but it's got some issues that I'm going to get into. But let's carry on. December 23rd again, 3 stars. Matt Damon, given his predicament and the backlash of being a white person cast in a movie that was based in China, still gave a great performance. The plot was nothing special, but I thoroughly enjoyed the concept. The cinematography was beautifully shot, and the colors throughout the movie make it very pleasing to the eyes. Without the camera work, this would not be a good movie. I think this movie is still worth a watch. I'll agree largely with that. The cinematography is just great. The color palette is just fantastic. There's nothing wrong with this visually. Even the CGI of the monsters isn't bad at all. It's just that the plot wasn't that great. The premise was fantastic. I thought Matt Damon's performance was fine. I thought Pedro Pascal's performance was fine. I thought William Dafoe, he didn't do bad, but he just wasn't utilized very much at all. He was a minor character in this, but I can't fault the actors. I don't think it has anything to do with the actors why this deserves to be rotten. I think it's still all the script, all the plot, and I'll just say right from the get-go, this movie didn't attempt to explain why that the entire Great Wall of China would be needed or constructed to keep out these monsters. They are basically aliens that have crashed on Earth in ancient times, and the Chinese don't see them as aliens, although they do recognize that they came from some kind of gigantic asteroid crash. They believe they're monsters, and that these monsters have been sent to punish them for their cultural problems, namely greed and etc., and that this is a punishment by the gods, that every long stretch of years, every 60 or 70 years, these monsters re-emerge from somewhere up in these mountains where this meteorite crashed, and they attempt to breach the wall, and they feed on humans, and they feed human flesh to their queen alien, or queen monster. The problem I have with this is that the aliens or the monsters are shown to be coming up from this mountainous area, and for some reason they need to funnel down through this canyon pass between the mountains to come and attack the wall. But it doesn't explain why these monsters couldn't just go around the wall or go around the mountains to a different stretch of the wall that wasn't being watched and manned, and just breached the wall from there. And it doesn't also explain why, after centuries of guarding this wall, the Chinese have never simply assembled a massive force to go wipe these creatures out where they're coming from, instead of just waiting for them to attack the wall after long stretches of time. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And if you were 10 or 12 years old, it probably would go over your head. It wouldn't be that bad. But as an adult, I need some kind of background that's a lot more logical and thought out than what this movie tried to do. Otherwise, I think this movie is enjoyable. It's just that premise of, how is this scenario logical? How did it come to be? It's just doesn't work for somebody that's, an adult with a rational mind. There's too much you have to hand wave away or forgive to get into this, to really find yourself believing in the story. And that's the major fault I give it. Another problem with this film is that, yes, you're asking yourself as an audience member, as an adult audience member, why they haven't assembled a force to not only go and wipe these monsters out at their source, but also why they have chosen to keep this secret from the rest of the world. In fact, part of the plot reveals to us that they don't want outsiders. They don't want, like Matt Damon's European outsider, they don't want him to leave the wall. They don't want him to tell the rest of the outside world that these monsters are up in this mountain and that they're being held back by this wall in China. For some reason, the Chinese want to take on this battle all by themselves, and it's not explained why that is, why they wouldn't ask for help from other countries, why they wouldn't want to reveal this to the rest of the world so that the rest of the world could send help and could see how serious it was and how serious the monster threat was, and of course come and help them wipe these monsters out. For some reason, the Chinese decide to keep this all a secret, and they're just going to stick it out alone, as illogical as that is. And I went into the running time of this about 30 or 40 minutes expecting to get an answer for why they needed to keep this a secret from the outside world. The movie never tells you, and the really illogical thing about the plot is that at a certain point in the plot, it all changes, and for some reason, the Emperor of China, he just decides to reverse all of this and not only ask for help in defeating the monsters, but also decide to try to attack them at the source. After all this time, or centuries, it is presumed, where this policy was the opposite. And it doesn't explain why they reversed course all of a sudden, and why only now, as Matt Damon and as Pedro Pascal's European characters happen into this setting, only at this time do these creatures manage to get over the wall and invade China proper, or what is shown to be the Emperor's palace at the capital city in China. Centuries before this, somehow the military of China has just organized themselves efficiently enough at this wall to keep these creatures from ever breaching it. But it's only when Matt Damon and Pedro Pascal are there as outsiders that all of a sudden, the creatures manage to breach the wall. It's a little too convenient, and it's one of two or three things that make this plot illogical. And as an adult, you can't just hand wave that away. You need these answers. Why is this all happening the way it is? And if you're 12 or you're 10 years old, maybe that doesn't bother you and you can just forgive it and ride along with the rest of the story. But that's largely the main thing that makes this rotten. And the ending, there's a final battle at the end where, in a very kind of unbelievable way, Matt Damon and a Chinese military character who's a woman, they defeat the alien queen, or the monster queen, and it's just not realistic. It's too over the top, too jumping the shark, unrealistic to be believable. I mean, you can kind of forgive a lot of things in action fantasy movies, but this one's just too unbelievable. It's set up, it's too hard for me as an adult to go along with it and believe it and feel tension in it. It just feels too convenient and way too action superhero type stuff going on at the end that I just can't believe. And it could have been believable if the movie were set up better, if those other flaws I talked about where the whole scenario doesn't quite make sense, if that had been explained earlier, I could have gotten over the rather over the top ending. But altogether, it's just too much to be believable, and so I watched the whole thing. So I would say it peaks out at 2 stars, but they should have put more thought into how to make this work logically, and they just didn't, because if you're older than 12, even if you're a teenager, this just isn't going to be believable to you at all. 1 star, November 23rd, 2019. This was so effing dumb. I can agree what you're saying. Like I said, it's just it's too dumb. It's not logically. It doesn't have enough logic to this to make it work, to make it totally believable. 3 stars. Okay-ish Chinese movie in English, Monsters Attacking the Great Wall of China with Matt Damon. I'll say one thing that's kind of strange to me. This is I've read that this is a Chinese movie pretty much with just Matt Damon and Pedro Pascal and William Dafoe, and it's not an American movie, it's a Chinese movie. But, this movie actually shows the Emperor of China actually literally cowering behind his own throne as a teenager, or, he's a very young emperor, maybe he's 15 or 16, and he's hiding behind his throne when the monsters attack. And I don't know why the Chinese would want to portray their emperor in this fashion, unless this is a thing of the modern government of China, and they're trying to kind of cast a dispersion in some way against the ancient Chinese emperor. It might be a case of modern China trying to take a dump on its traditionalists or something. But it's definitely a message in this film. There's no question that they've kind of taken a dump on the Chinese emperor of old, and I think it is a message in some regard like that. As an American, it's almost completely lost, but it's just, I didn't find it believable that an emperor of a country like China would be cowering behind his throne, and then after he was obviously and in full view of all his generals and even the public of being a coward behind his throne, that they would still respect him and respect his decisions as an emperor. It's just not believable to me as an American. So there definitely must be some kind of message behind this directed at the Chinese. So let's move on. I'm not going to read 5 and 4 star reviews because this is rotten reviews after all, and we're not going to learn anything from those. So let's move down to the next 3-star review, October 6, 2019. The incredible cinematography and impressive costume designs are in a completely different and better movie. The movie we are left with is, while not terrible, not as good as it should be, 6 out of 10. Yeah, it's just the script, the plot. It doesn't hold up for an adult. And I've assembled a little list of things here, of little nitpicks, some a lot more of a nitpick than others. Why do the monsters only choose to attack one section of the wall that is obviously heavily guarded and heavily monitored? Doesn't make a lot of sense, especially if they're trying to escape from their area that they're kind of pinned into. And it's not really shown that they're pinned into this area. Like, you see the mountains behind them, and they're kind of up in a canyon where this meteorite is, or this meteor, or whatever you call it. It's this glowing green rock that's up in the mountains. And it's kind of shown that they have to kind of escape by going down this canyon towards the wall. But why couldn't they just climb over the wall or tunnel through it? Because they're shown to be tunnelers that can tunnel under the wall later in the film, but they don't try to tunnel under the mountain and go around the wall. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, why did they not attack the lair? How come the Chinese never assembled some massive military force? Because in the movie, they are clearly capable of assembling such a force, but they never bother to go off and just try to put an end to these monsters once and for all. They just wait for them to attack every few decades. Makes no sense, but let's move on. 1 star, September 24, 2019. Story is like monster just wanted to cross the wall, and at the end they killed main one monster and all of them get killed by itself. Just F off, you piece of shit. What are you smoking nowadays? Because I have never seen worse crap movie than this one. It's totally bullshit, and F your flying monkeys. That's why I hate most of the Chinese films. F you flying monkeys and stupid, illogical, insane story and story writers, and WTF Matt. I didn't expect that much crap bullshit from you. Yeah, this guy's really upset. I'm wondering if he's a Chinese moviegoer or what, because his English isn't so good, but he knows a lot of swear words. I'll just try to translate it a bit here. It was hard enough to read. I'm thinking that what they're saying is, yeah, the logic doesn't work at all. At the end of this, at the final boss battle, after Matt Damon and the female character, they kill the queen monster. After they kill her, it's almost like she's a robot. All the other thousands of her minions, which are quite powerful fighting creatures, they just kind of freeze up and drop over dead because she's dead. That would work if these were like alien robots of some type. Okay, sure. Robots can all be linked to a central robot or something like that, but even that's stretching it, right? In a sci-fi movie, that's a little contrived. We've seen it before. But these are actual biological monsters of some type, like dragons. And once the queen is destroyed, all of the other ones, they just drop over dead like robots. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and that's part of this over the top ending I was talking about, that it might work for 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 year olds, but a teenager and above, it's just not going to fly. This isn't quite a sci-fi movie. This is more like an action adventure fantasy movie, even though they are aliens of a type. But even if they are aliens, it doesn't make sense for biological creatures to just drop over dead because their leader did. It makes no sense. So let's move on. 2 stars, not English, and I'm not going to read 3.5 star reviews because this is Rotten Reviews after all. So let's move down. We have a 3-star review, August 10, 2019. I watched the movie on Hulu and enjoyed the movie, except for I was expecting dragons instead of alien-looking monsters. Enjoyed most of the movie, and the premise was okay, but if they had been fighting these monsters for years, why did it take so long to figure out the magnet? The accent was cheesy and would have been better for him to go with his own, since it didn't add anything to the movie, but we enjoyed it, and the visual effects were pretty good. The female general was awesome. Yeah, I'll largely agree with this. Another problem that I had on my list that this reviewer just brought up is that it is shown that magnets or magnetic rocks, natural magnets, we call them lodestones, or that's what they were called back in the day. When you have this in your possession or you have this around you, these creatures, since they get their commands, they get their telepathic link with their queen through some kind of magnetic transmission. When you have magnets, strong magnets around you, it makes them blind to you. They can't get their orders. They basically don't see you. Okay, that's okay. That's something that works in the film. But, a real problem with that is that at one part of the movie, it's shown that the Chinese don't really know what a magnet is. And then later in the movie, all of a sudden, they know what a magnet is and call it a magnet. And then later on, again, further in the story, it's back to their scientific or their imperial advisors are back to pretending like they all of a sudden don't know what magnets are again, and they think of them as a magical force. So which is it? Did the ancient Chinese of this time period actually know what a magnet was, or did they think it was magic? Because this movie is telling you both things at the same time, and depending on what part of the movie you're in is whether they're calling it a magnet or some magical mysterious force. It's very strange. The movie, it's a failure of the script, straight up script problem. Like many of the movie's problems, just a straight up script problem. Kind of leaves you scratching your head on that one. Yeah, Matt Damon has an accent and Pedro Pascal has a Spanish accent, which is fine. They still did a good job. The characters were good enough, even with the accents. But as far as the Chinese go, it was very convenient that the Chinese had somebody there in the character of William Defoe, who was already there as kind of in custody of the Chinese for many years prior. He taught them how to speak English, and it was just very easy that they could somehow, some of the characters that needed to could somehow converse in English with Pedro Pascal and Matt Damon's characters. Didn't make a whole lot of sense. It was very convenient for the plot. The plot needed this to happen. It needed certain Chinese characters to speak English, and the movie didn't do a very good job of making that believable. It could have. It could have spent time making it believable, but it didn't. And in a very childish way, they could just somehow pick up the accents and the English just fine, and it was just not believable. It was another problem with the script. Let's move on. 1.5 stars, August 8th, 2019. The Great Wall is an ugly Lord of the Rings meets War of the Worlds. It's not ugly. It does look good. It's got a lot of very good color. It's got a lot of good designs. The CGI, the artistry behind it is very good. However, you know, when the movie opens and it shows the Great Wall, and there's kind of a shot where you kind of zoom in and fly over the Great Wall of China, you can tell that the Great Wall of China is completely designed on a computer, and the bricks are very uniform. Even though there are different bricks, they're very uniform, and it's a little too shiny and a little too clear. And some of the CGI like that, it's a little bit too comic book cartoony looking, and yet it's beautiful to look at. It just doesn't look completely real. So it kind of it makes it hard to get into this, to believe in what's going on. But otherwise, it's very visually appealing. It's just not completely realistic looking. That's the problem. But it's not ugly, that's for sure. 1.5 stars, July 17th, 2019. I super don't care. This looks like an advertisement for a brand I wouldn't bother buying. Okay, I guess. There certainly is not any product placement. It's set in medieval times, and I don't know how you could work product placement is into it. I don't know how you could sell things in this. To me, this looks like the only advertisement the movie might be trying to do is to send some kind of message to the public in China from the Chinese government. And I think I touched on that a little bit, but from the point of view of an American, there's no advertisement or message to be found at all, except if this reviewer is talking about the suspension of disbelief, then I'll agree. You're not really sold on the believability of a lot of things that happened script-wise, plot-wise. 3 stars, July 17. The legends of China are really interesting to me, and seeing this satisfied me even though it lacked a few things. Towards the end it felt rushed, but I liked the costumes and some of the action. In the end, I enjoyed it all right. I think no, there's no legends of China here, really. I think that's, you know, another reviewer brought that up, that he wanted to see dragons, but these aren't actually dragons. They're more like some type of alien that resembles a dragon in some ways. And I think the reason for that, again, is it has something to do with the modern Chinese government. You couldn't make it dragons because it wouldn't put the message forth that the Chinese government wanted to put forth. They're really strange about this type of stuff in entertainment. Even American movies, big ones from the U.S., have to make certain alterations of things that wouldn't have any meaning over here necessarily, but they have certain subtle meanings in China, and putting dragons into it, like you were maybe expecting, was probably not along with what the Chinese government wanted to put out with this film, because I think this was a message meant for Chinese consumption, not American consumption. So we didn't get dragons, although I think that would have been better. That would have worked better in America, to get rid of the whole alien thing and just have it straight up ancient dragons. That would have been better, but we didn't get that. 2.5 stars, June 22nd, 2019. When this was in theaters, the casting baffled me. After seeing a little of it, I realized it's a monster movie, really. It turned out not to be nearly as bad as I was expecting. Sure, it jumps all over and has many plot holes, but still the lore was entertaining enough. Tianjing was the real star of the movie. I think that's the female character that became a general and the leader at the end. I don't know. I've never seen her before that I'm aware of, so I don't know if she was good or bad. She seemed to do an okay job in the role. The role seemed convincing enough to me. You know, the logic in this movie, again, I'll mention that plot holes, yeah. These creatures are shown to be tunneling at one point in the movie. They tunnel under the wall and happen to actually make it into the area of the capital city by tunneling underground. But yet they never did this before, and they never tunneled under the wall. I mean, the Great Wall of China is thousands of kilometers, right? So even no matter where you choose to put this place where they're battling to get over the wall, all they had to do is move kilometers in any direction around in those mountains, and they would have been able to tunnel under undetected. But they never seem to do that. They just want to tunnel under right there, under the most heavily watched, guarded part of that wall. And another part, speaking of the wall, that doesn't make sense, and it's a plot hole. Early in the movie, it's shown that when you want to go down and do something at the base of the wall on the alien or monster side of the wall, you need to like go down, kind of rappel down on ropes, be lowered down, which is fine. But then later on in the movie, it's shown that, well, no, there's actually a door hidden in the bottom, and a recessed stone door can just be opened at the bottom, and people can go in and out at the bottom of the wall. So why were they rappelling down all the times before that to get to the bottom of the wall? And it also doesn't make sense because after the battle, they have this first wave of monsters that tries to come over the wall, and they're repelled. After some time, they're repelled back, this particular wave of monsters. And there's all this debris at the bottom of the wall, including dead bodies and uniforms and weapons and shields and whatnot that have been, you know, they're laying out on the ground at the base of the wall, and there's no attempt to made to collect these or to police the debris. This is what happens on a battlefield. You know, after the battlefield's over, there are people or soldiers or scavengers that go through the debris and collect the weapons and get rid of the bodies and etc., especially right out of military encampments. But they don't attempt to do this, and the Chinese soldiers, the Chinese military, they just leave all this debris and weaponry and stuff just laying down there at the base of the wall, and make no attempt to clean it up. And yet it's shown that all they had to do was open that door at the bottom of the wall, and they could send a crew out to clean it all up in a short amount of time. But it's very strange. Plot holes, plot holes, and plot holes in the script. And these things, just the more the running time goes on, the more you see these plot holes. And it has to be this way to make the movie go where it needs to go and end up where it needs to end up at the final battle. But they should have put more care into it. You know, the script writers, they completely failed on this one. Again, if you're 10 years old, it works for you. You won't see these plot holes, at least not on the first viewing. But as an adult, no way. This just doesn't work. You can't believe it because there's too many things like this going on. But the acting, I thought that was passable, and the visuals were fine. So let's move on. June 9th, 2019, 2.5 stars. I mean, I got to say it is beautiful at times, especially that color inside a pagoda in the film. Wow. The creatures are cool looking, and its visuals are sort of neat. Also, costume design, drums in the film during action, etc. It does have flaws. I think one possible plot hole where they don't talk about the creatures much before they come, and it's got other flaws. It was close to worse. Yeah, it's got a lot of flaws. Mostly, I've just touched on the major ones. What else is on my list? Well, yeah, why are they keeping this a secret? You know, it's shown that the main reason why they don't want to allow Matt Damon and Pedro Pascal's characters to leave, even after they've proven themselves as worthy fighters, and they're kind of almost owed some respect at one point, but they still don't want to let them just leave, because if they do, they'll tell the outside world what's going on. And why would the Chinese government not want anybody in the outside world to realize how serious the situation was? If anything, I'm sorry, they would want the outside world to know so that they could either leverage it to their benefit, or they could just straight up get help in getting rid of these damn monsters. Either way, it would be a tremendous negotiating point of leverage to have this situation going on. You could leverage a lot of your surrounding countries to give you supplies to do what you wanted to for your efforts in keeping these monsters at bay, but nope. The plot logic isn't there. I mean, the script is illogical. For some reason, they just chose to keep this a secret. From any point of view, that doesn't make any logical sense in any setting either. It doesn't make sense in ancient China, and it doesn't make sense in modern China either. Even in modern China, if something like this were going on, they would love to be able to leverage this situation on the world stage and tell everybody what was going on. But nope. In this movie, that nobody's smart enough to realize that. They just want to try to stick it out against these monsters all by themselves. Really smart, and a lot of the rest of the movie would have never been possible without that, you know, without that situation, without that bad logic already being in place. 1 star, June 9th, 2019. Reality would have made for a much better movie. Maybe, but I don't think the message the Chinese government wanted to the people of China to get out of this film was anything close to reality, trust me. Half a star, May 24th. Hard to believe Matt Damon would appear in such a bad movie. Really, I've seen him in other bad movies. Sometimes he makes some really weird choices in films, and trust me, this is not the worst movie he's been in. He's chosen to appear in some really bad ones, and largely they're forgettable, so it hasn't damaged him too much. But trust me, he's been in plenty of bad ones. But I'll continue. Bad directing leads to bad acting plastered on top of not really compelling CGI monsters and a boringly predictable plot. This movie features China dolls, bungee jumping China dolls, jumping down and jabbing sticks into toothy green Rottweilers, and the movie just gets worse from there. Actually, if it has any entertainment value whatsoever, it was from the fun I had making fun of how really bad it is. They're basically saying there's nothing redeemable here. I don't agree with that. I think this rises up to actually 2 stars, 1.5 to 2 stars. It's worth watching once. It's not unenjoyable. It's just got a lot of logical stuff going on that it's full of plot holes, like Swiss cheese in a way. Let's see, what else do I have on my list? Yeah, monsters dig under the wall. They can dig, and they can do it quietly where you don't know they've done it, and yet they never tried to dig out before. They've never, in all the centuries they've been there, they've just never decided to dig out in another direction. They've always just come at the wall, and that makes no sense, especially since it's shown that these monsters are controlled by quite an intelligent queen-like leader. She's not stupid. She's smart enough to have done this, and for some reason she just decided she didn't need to tunnel out at any time. Yeah, there's the other problem where certain characters in the Chinese army, in the Chinese military, they they act like they don't know about the origins of the monsters much at all. They act like they're mysterious, and then at other times they know quite a lot about their biological lifestyle and how they will behave in battle, and there's no reason why they would know these things. They state straight up that they've never actually assembled a big force to go off and defeat them, so they've only defended them on the wall, and yet at another point in the movie where they're forced to fight them out in the open, they seem to know a hell of a lot about how the alien queen is going to do the battle, and how the worker fighter creatures are actually going to feed her, and how they're going to behave, and they wouldn't know all these things. It's very strange. It's more bad script writing where, they know almost everything about the creatures when they need to, and then when the plot needs them to not know anything about them, they suddenly don't know anything about them again. It's just like, this movie's just like that in a lot of ways, and it would work on a 10-year-old, but it doesn't work on an adult. 2.5 stars, May 23rd, 2019, is a film just to watch when you don't have anything more to see. I'll agree, if there's nothing else on, go ahead and watch it. Don't pay money for it, but just watch it. It's worth watching one time just to see something different. There are some interesting visuals that you don't see in a lot of high budget movies, because it's made by the Chinese production. Maybe you could say that it's made by the Chinese government, because in effect anything that's actually a Chinese company is pretty much the Chinese government, whether they want to label it that or not. Half a star, May 20. Everything, it's great, but I expected the kiss at the end and it didn't happen. So yeah, that's the thing. That's another reason why I think that this has had to conform to certain dictates from the Chinese government, modern Chinese government, because in an American production like this, you would have a romance between Matt Damon's character and the Chinese general. There's no question. And they kind of tried to go there, but they couldn't. They couldn't have them kiss. They couldn't have them have more than just get close and talk intimately a little bit, because this is basically for Chinese consumption, and the Chinese government would not have liked that. Say what you will about modern China, but they have not only political differences with Americans, but they have racial differences too, and that's just the way it is. They're not going to endorse, like, Matt Damon's white European character having some kind of romance with the Chinese general. That's not going to happen, not in the modern China of 2019. no way, no how. So yeah, I can tell that that wasn't allowed. But in American production, there's no question that that would have been up front and center. We would have seen a romance there. That's just standard for this type of movie. 1.5 stars, May 10th, 2019. This movie was lambasted for its use of a white guy in what should have been an Asian role, but it was terrible for a whole host of other reasons. I have to imagine that this movie was made for a Chinese audience and that their tastes are just different than the North American audience, because this was the most horrible big budget movie I've ever seen. Okay, now remember, it's not just the Chinese public's taste for entertainment, because they do watch a lot of stuff that they're not even supposed to. They find ways to do this, and they do it in large numbers, trust me. No, this is more accurately described as the taste of the Chinese government. Not the Chinese audience, not the regular Chinese person necessarily, but what the Chinese government demands in a movie production that happens in China. They are heavily involved in it. And so this is not the taste of the Chinese audience. This is the taste of the Chinese government. That's what you're dealing with here. So let's get that part straight, because you need to remember that that's priority number one, is pleasing the Chinese government, not necessarily the man on the street in China, because they get what the government tells them they're going to get. 3 stars, May 7th, 2019. Stunning, but overall lacking the emotional aspect to make you care. Yeah, some of that's because you couldn't have the romance that Americans would have wanted in this type of story, and also because the plot logic and stuff, the script was bad. You just couldn't get invested because you couldn't believe in enough of it to actually have an emotional feeling for this, because you were too busy just not really believing what was going on. Not because of bad visuals or CGI, but again, because the logic doesn't work. 2 stars, April 30, 2019. Very predictable and generally meh story. Matt Damon is doing his best, but not enough to save the movie. Well, he can only do what the script demands, and the script can only demand what the Chinese government demands. That's the bottom line here. If you had made this in the U.S., you would have a lot of things, a lot of elements that are missing in this that would have been there in a real Hollywood production, because we don't have the government telling us exactly what we can put in our movies beyond, ratings. So yeah, the real flaw with this, plot logic, script-wise, and just it's missing a lot of the elements that a film of this type would have in an American production. And a lot of that's just because the Chinese government is definitely involved. And so that 42% audience score, that's why you have that 42% audience score. That's why this is definitely rotten. This is not an unwatchable movie. It's not a movie that's offensively bad. It's not a bad performance by Matt Damon or anybody else. It's just not made for Americans. It's made for the Chinese consumption, and that's what it is. And I'm going to see you on the next edition of Rotten Reviews.